always thought betrayal would feel like a knife, sharp, sudden, leaving you gasping. But when it finally happened, it wasn't a stabbing pain. It was a slow, burning realization, like standing too close to a fire and realizing too late that your skin is already blistered. Dear viewers, welcome to our channel. Subscribe to receive more stories every day. Started on a Thursday. The boardroom smelled of leather chairs, anxiety, and the faint bitterness of the coffee. Victor insisted we serve in expensive, branded mugs. There were 20 of us gathered there. Executives, lawyers, investors from 3 different continents, and me, sitting quietly at the corner of the massive oak table, flipping through the latest quarterly reports I had personally prepared. Victor stood at the head of the table, handsome and confident in his tailored navy suit, flashing his trademark smile to the investors. He was electric in these settings, and once I admired that about him. Once. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victor said, spreading his arms wide like a king addressing his court, "I know there have been concerns about the direction of Vector Tech. I want to assure you with absolute certainty that I and my team have everything under control." He glanced at me when he said team, but it wasn't a look of solidarity. It was a warning. I stiffened in my seat, pretending not to notice. The senior partner from Weston Holdings leaned forward, a pen tapping against his notebook. "And who, precisely, is making the operational decisions?" he asked. "We've heard rumors of conflict at the top." The question hung in the air like smoke. Victor smiled that smile, the one that could melt steel, and said almost casually, "There's no conflict, just a few misunderstandings. And to clear up any confusion, allow me to be completely transparent." He turned, pointing directly at me. "Elena," he said, voice dripping condescension, "why don't you step outside for this part? It's a bit above your pay grade." First I didn't move. Thought surely I heard wrong. The room fell silent. Chairs creaked. Papers rustled. No one dared look at me directly. I stared at Victor. He gave a slight nod, the kind you give to a waiter who's lingered too long at your table. "Get out," his eyes said. A flush of humiliation rose to my cheeks. I swallowed it down, bit the inside of my cheek hard enough to taste blood, and gathered my folder without a word. I walked out of the room, head high, back straight, but inside something cracked. I pressed my hand against the wall outside the conference room, struggling to breathe. It wasn't just the humiliation. It was the betrayal. After everything we had built together, after every late night, every sacrifice, every dream, Victor had discarded me like I was furniture. I didn't cry. I refused to. Instead, I walked past the receptionist, past the marble elevators, past the glass doors bearing the Vector Tech logo I had designed. By the time my heels clicked out onto the pavement, my hands were shaking with something far stronger than sadness. Determination. Because Victor had just made a colossal mistake. And he didn't even realize it yet. The story of how Vector Tech came to life wasn't one Victor liked to tell anymore. It had started with my inheritance. $250,000 left to me by my grandfather, a man Victor had barely tolerated but whose money he had eagerly accepted. It had continued with my business acumen, my late nights, my careful negotiations, my stubborn insistence on protecting us from shady investors. It had been me who suggested we structure the company with a 2-tier share system, where silent partners could hold majority shares without disclosing their identity publicly. A move Victor agreed to at the time because he thought it would give us an advantage. It was me who had suggested he list himself as the operational CEO, while I remained in the background, shielded, so I could step in if ever necessary. Failsafe. Parachute. Because deep down, I had always known Victor loved the spotlight more than he loved me. And so, while the world thought Victor Dalton was the sole owner of Vector Tech, the reality, hidden in our original founding documents, was very different. 60% of Vector Tech's shares were mine. All legally registered. All binding. All waiting for the right moment. I didn't go home. Home was a luxury I couldn't afford right now. Not when Victor would undoubtedly be spinning whatever narrative he needed to erase me completely. Instead, I went to the one place I could still think clearly. My old apartment above the antique bookstore on Lambert Street. The place I had lived before Victor, before Vectortech, before the suits and the private jets and the investor meetings. It smelled like dust and old paper and forgotten dreams. I dug through the worn filing cabinet in the corner until I found it. My copy of the original Vectortech Incorporation papers, notarized, signed and sealed. There on page 3 in black and white. Elena Hartley. Majority shareholder, silent partner, 60% ownership. My hands trembled as I traced the letters. All this time I had told myself that my silence was strength, that letting Victor shine was a sacrifice worth making, that loyalty meant fading into the background for the greater good. But loyalty only works when it's mutual. Victor had forgotten that. The next few days passed in a blur of legal consultations and quiet, methodical planning. I called in favors from old colleagues, hired a discreet corporate attorney specializing in hostile takeovers, and assembled a plan that would ensure not just my return, but Victor's very public downfall. Timing was everything. The upcoming shareholders' meeting was only 2 weeks away. And according to Vectortech's bylaws, any shareholder holding more than 50% of the company could call for an emergency leadership vote at the meeting. It was perfect, elegant, devastating. Victor had thrown me out like I was nothing. Now I would walk back in and take everything. 2 nights before the shareholders' meeting, I sat alone at a coffee shop across from the Vectortech headquarters, watching the building glow against the evening sky. I thought about the early days. Victor sleeping on the office couch, me negotiating with banks, both of us dreaming of success. I thought about how far we had come, and how far he had fallen. I wasn't doing this out of revenge, I told myself. I was doing it to save the company we had built. But deep down, a darker, quieter voice whispered, "He needs to know. He needs to see. Not just that I survived without him, but that I had always been stronger. Always." The day of the shareholder meeting dawned crisp and cold, a sharp wind biting through the city streets like the final warning before a storm. I stood in front of the Vectortech building, the sun catching on its massive glass facade. It looked different now, more like a fortress than a home. But I wasn't afraid. In my hand was a slim black folder. Inside, everything I needed to take back what was mine. I wore a simple, tailored black suit. No jewelry, no frills. I wanted no distractions. Today there would be no mistaking who I was. I crossed the lobby with deliberate steps. Security barely glanced at me. They still remembered me, Mrs. Dalton, the silent wife, the supportive partner. Not for much longer. The elevator climbed smooth and fast to the executive floor. As the doors slid open, I could already hear the murmur of voices. Dozens of shareholders gathered in the gleaming conference hall, buzzing with anticipation. Victor was there, of course, center stage, laughing, charming, shaking hands. He didn't notice me at first. Too busy performing. I slipped into a seat near the back, unnoticed, laying the black folder carefully on the polished table in front of me. Victor clapped his hands once. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for coming. I know there's been a lot of noise lately about company direction, leadership, and profitability. But let me reassure you, we are stronger than ever." Polite applause rippled through the room. I watched him, studying every gesture, every fake smile. He wore the confidence of a man who thought he had already won. I let him talk. Let him build his castle higher and higher, brick by arrogant brick. Because when it collapsed, the fall would be spectacular. "Now," Victor continued, beaming, "I'd like to open the floor to any comments or concerns before we proceed with the shareholder resolutions." The Weston Holdings senior partner, the same man from the last meeting, raised his hand. "Actually, we have a concern regarding voting rights," he said, glancing meaningfully around the room. "There seems to be confusion over the current share distribution. We'd appreciate a clarification before any major votes." Victor's smile tightened, just for a second. "Of course," he said smoothly. "As of the last audit, I hold 40% of Vectortech personally, and the remaining shares are distributed among minor investors." A murmur ran through the room. Understood." Chairs scraped against the floor as heads turned. Whispers flickered across the room like sparks. Victor's eyes landed on me. First confusion, then annoyance. He stepped forward. "This is a closed session," he said sharply. "You're not authorized to be here." Smiled. "Oh, controlled. Deadly." "I believe I am," I said, raising my voice so everyone could hear. "As the majority shareholder of Vectra Tech, I have every right to be present, and to call for an emergency leadership vote." The room exploded into murmurs. Some gasped outright. Victor's face drained of color. "You're bluffing," he spat. I opened the black folder slowly, deliberately, and pulled out the founding documents. The original notarized agreement that Victor himself had signed all those years ago. I walked to the center of the room, heels clicking against the marble floor, and laid the document on the table before the Weston Holdings representative. He scanned it quickly, his eyes widening. "It's legitimate," he said, voice carrying across the stunned room. "Elena Hartley holds 60% of Vectra Tech. She is, in fact, the controlling shareholder." The silence that followed was absolute. Victor stumbled forward, grabbing the papers as if he could tear the truth apart with his bare hands. "This is outdated. It's not valid anymore," he barked. I raised an eyebrow. "I have a full record of every stock issuance since the company's founding. None of them altered the original ownership structure. You never rescinded the silent partner clause." I turned to the board. "As majority shareholder, I am calling for an immediate leadership vote." The process was swift and brutal. Lawyers, who until that morning had worshipped Victor, now shuffled papers and whispered among themselves. The Weston Holdings representative stepped forward to oversee the vote as a neutral party. Victor, trembling with rage, tried everything: bullying, pleading, empty promises. It didn't matter. Vote after vote went against him. When the final tally was read aloud, it was official. Victor Dalton was removed as CEO of Vectra Tech, effective immediately. And in his place, Elena Hartley, the silent partner, the ghost he had tried to erase, was named president and CEO by overwhelming majority. Victor stood there, shaking. "You can't do this," he hissed. "You can't just take it all." I stepped closer, looking him dead in the eyes. "You already did," I said quietly. "You just didn't realize you were handing it to me." Security moved forward to escort him out. He struggled at first, then, realizing the finality of it, went limp. As he passed me, he paused. "I made you," he snarled. Smiled. "No, Victor," I said. "I made you. You just forgot who built the ground you stood on." He was gone. The doors swung shut behind him with a heavy finality, like a prison door slamming. The room sat in stunned silence for a long moment. Applause. Tentative at first, then swelling. The senior executives, the board members, the shareholders, they all stood and clapped. Not because they loved me, not because they were loyal, but because they respected power. And today, power had a new name. After the meeting, I stood alone in the conference room, staring out at the city skyline. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving me raw and shaking. Was this victory? Was this what winning felt like? It wasn't the triumph I expected. It was heavier, bitter, but it was necessary. Because sometimes the only way to survive is to stop being the person who waits outside the door, and become the one who owns the building. I picked up the black folder, tucked it under my arm, and walked out. I had a company to run. And this time, no one was going to kick me out. The news broke before I even got home. By the time I kicked off my heels and collapsed onto the old couch in my apartment, headlines were already lighting up my phone. Victor Dalton ousted in shock takeover at Vectra Tech. Mystery majority shareholder revealed. Meet Elena Hartley, the silent partner who outplayed her own husband. I stared at the screen, feeling nothing. No joy, no anger, just a hollow sort of exhaustion. The interviews started almost immediately. Reporters clamoring for statements, old colleagues texting congratulations or apologies. Some I answered. Most I didn't. Because right now, I wasn't interested in their approval. I was interested in rebuilding. The first board meeting under my leadership felt surreal. The room looked the same. Polished wood, glass walls, floor-to-ceiling views of the city. But everything else had changed. I sat at the head of the table now. No corner seats. No whispered suggestions. No pretending. I was no longer the supportive wife, or the invisible partner. I was the architect, the strategist, the boss. I surveyed the faces around the table. Wary, cautious, measuring me. But let them be unsure. Let them wonder what I would do next. I leaned forward, hands folded neatly on the table. "Gentlemen," I said calmly, "Vectratech's days of smoke and mirrors are over. We are going to rebuild this company from the ground up, with transparency, integrity, and results." A few exchanged nervous glances. One or two nodded. It didn't matter. They would fall in line or they would fall away. I wasn't here to beg. I was here to lead. The first major order of business. A complete audit. I hired an independent forensic accounting firm to dig into every dark corner of the company's finances, places Victor had carefully kept hidden from even his closest allies. The results were worse than I had feared. Lavish personal expenses buried under business development budgets. Illegal offshore accounts. Fraudulent billing schemes. He hadn't just betrayed me. He had betrayed the company, the employees, the shareholders, everyone who had ever believed in Vectratech. I authorized immediate legal action. By the time the lawsuits hit Victor's new address, a dingy condo rented under a shell company, he was already buried in debt. It wasn't revenge. It was justice. And justice, I had learned, was best served with ice in its veins. Despite the chaos, Vectratech began to stabilize. The company had good bones, solid products, talented engineers, loyal customers. It just needed a leader who cared more about the mission than the spotlight. Under my leadership, we refocused on core technologies, cut bloated departments, and renegotiated vendor contracts that Victor had mishandled. Revenue started to climb, slowly at first, then faster. The media, ever hungry for a new narrative, dubbed it the silent comeback. They loved the story. The invisible wife who outsmarted her charismatic husband. They loved the photo ops, the interviews, the symbolism. But they didn't understand the real story. The real story wasn't about a woman outsmarting a man. It was about reclaiming what was always mine. It was about refusing to be erased. 6 months later, I stood on the balcony of the new Vectratech headquarters, a sleek, sunlit tower downtown, and looked out over the city. This time I wasn't alone. Next to me stood Anna Brooks, my newly appointed SE. Smart, ruthless when needed, loyal without being sycophantic. Together we had assembled a new leadership team, diverse, sharp, and fiercely committed to the company's future. Hard to believe, isn't it? Anna said, sipping her coffee. 6 months ago, this place was a mess. I smiled, a real one this time. Hard to believe how much you can change, I said, when you stop asking for permission. Anna laughed. It was a good sound, clear, fearless. Exactly the kind of sound I wanted filling these halls. Later that evening, I sat alone in my office, the corner office that had once belonged to Victor, and opened the bottom drawer of the massive mahogany desk. Inside, neatly folded, was the first business plan I had ever written, dated 5 years ago. Vectratech, vision for the future. My handwriting was smaller back then. Sure. But the words still burned with the same fire. Innovation through integrity. Growth through trust. Leadership through vision. I traced the words with my fingers, remembering. I remembered the girl who had stayed up nights drafting that plan. The girl who had loaned out her dreams, believing someone else would cherish them as much as she did. I wasn't that girl anymore. I was the woman who had learned, sometimes painfully, that if you don't guard your dreams, someone else will steal them. And sometimes they'll try to erase you entirely. But erasing someone isn't easy. Not when they know who they are. Not when they hold the pen. The phone buzzed. A message from my lawyer. Victor accepted the settlement offer. He signed away all rights. Done. I stared at the message for a long moment. No fanfare. No final confrontation. Just an ending. Simple. Quiet. Exactly how it needed to be. I stood, walking to the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city pulse with life below. My reflection looked back at me. Stronger, steadier, sharper. I thought about everything it had taken to get here. The sacrifices. The heartbreak. The lessons. If I could go back, would I do it differently? Maybe. But maybe not. Because sometimes, losing everything you thought mattered is the only way to find what truly does. Yourself. Your strength. A voice. As the sun dipped behind the skyline, bathing the city in gold, I whispered to the glass. I am not your silent partner anymore. And for the first time in a very, very long time, smiled. Dear viewers, thank you for watching. If you like this story, please subscribe to our channel to receive more stories every day. Share with us what you think of this story and tell us where you're watching from.